But relations between the Pankhursts reached a new low when, at the age of 45, Sylvia became an unmarried mother. She clearly took delight in the annoyance this caused to the conservative wing of the family, especially as she sold the story to the news of the world.
From the obscurity in which she has lived since the memorable days of the militant suffragettes, Miss Sylvia Pankhurst springs a new sensation.
Perhaps it was a coincidence, but a few weeks later, Emmeline collapsed and died. And even that didn't stop the antagonisms. At the memorial service, one of the speakers was Stanley Baldwin, leader of the Conservatives, and Sylvia was excluded from the arrangements. And then came an extraordinary chapter in the history of the women's movement, which began when Mussolini invaded Ethiopia in 1936. Now, Sylvia had been one of the few British socialists of her generation to oppose the philosophy of empire. Harry Quelch, one of the leading early figures in the labour movement, had written,
"Zulus belong to a different evolutionary epoch. It would be better if they all stayed in their own countries."
Sylvia led the campaign in Britain to impose sanctions against the Italians and travelled to Ethiopia to offer support, to the extent that officials at the British Embassy wrote,
"This confounded Pankhurst woman is more fuzzy-wuzzy than the fuzzy-wuzzies."
The Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie fled to Britain, living in Bath, where he became friends with Sylvia. And he would spend his holidays in Worthing, which I find extraordinary. I wonder if there's footage of him going up to a policeman and saying, "Excuse me, Babylon, we lose our way upon them rascals, crazy goal." Once the Second World War started, Britain was at war with Italy, so they sent a force to Ethiopia to drive Mussolini out. But then they occupied the place themselves. So Sylvia continued to campaign for independence to the extent that Churchill kept a file called
"How to Answer Letters from Miss Sylvia Pankhurst."
By the end of the war, Haile Selassie had been reinstated as emperor, and he invited Sylvia to visit as his advisor on policies for women. You can't help thinking that when the king of the Rastafarians invites one of the century's most famous feminists to advise him on policies for women, there must be some awkward moments. Such as this bit here about women being unclean during their periods. Anything wrong with that? One of Sylvia's campaigns was against the BBC. Each night during the war, the Home Service would play the national anthems of the Allied countries, but not that of Ethiopia. So she led a campaign that forced the BBC to add it to the nightly anthems. Sylvia went to Addis Ababa and was appalled to find that a ban on blacks entering certain areas was still being operated by the British. So from her suburban home she kept on campaigning, and when a new constitution was agreed, ending the occupation and granting the vote to everyone over 21, she said,
"The victory of Ethiopia is the most satisfactory achievement I have seen."
At the age of 77, her beloved Silvio died, after which Sylvia wept for days. Sylvia and Silvio's 30 years here is marked only by this pacifist monument that they erected themselves in 1935. And as you can see, the good people of Woodford tend to it lovingly on a daily basis with wax, teacup, polish, varnish, window lean. Nothing's too much trouble. When Sylvia received an invitation to work with the Emperor Haile Selassie, she went with her son to live in Ethiopia. And then in 1960, at the age of 78, she died. Haile Selassie flew to Addis Ababa to order a state funeral at which he stood for the whole 2 hours. And across the east end of London, loads of blokes stood by the side of the road going, "Whatever they say about Syl, she never threw bricks at her home." Now, a large part of the women's movement claims that Jordan is a role model, or that Diana was a modern feminist. Some even say she was a Republican, though given that her main ambition was for her son to become king, I'd suggest that puts her on the moderate wing of the Republican movement. And politicians blame the ever-decreasing number of people who bother to vote on apathy. But how can it be apathy, given that we've recently seen the largest demonstrations in British history? That's not apathy, it's because fewer and fewer people feel any connection between themselves and the politicians. It's like if Cliff Richard was doing a concert 3 doors from my house, I wouldn't go. That wouldn't be apathy. I wouldn't be sat at home going, "Oh, we'll be doing Bachelor Boy in a minute, but I can't be bothered." It's willful non-participation. Sylvia Pankhurst understood that the vote was worth campaigning for because it raised the status of women. It was a victory against the attitudes of those who would never allow women a say until they were bigger than men. However bizarre her final days, Sylvia Pankhurst lasted the course that so few manage.
Hello.
Never for a minute embodying passionless dullness. Throughout her entire life, she was intrepid, spirited and interested.
Oh, what's the point? What's the point of coming here?
The chairman of Bad Hair Days on BBC Two, Donald Trump, puts The Apprentice USA in the firing line next.
Fight for your right to participate in the Mark Steele lectures. The website is at open2.net.